Welcome, everyone. This is Megan Zottarelli, Senior Analyst with the Institute for Veteran Policy at Swords Plowshares. This is the last of our series of technical assistance webinars for the California and Texas Veteran Employment and Training Collaboratives, administered by Swords Plowshares. During today's webinar, we'll discuss program development and sustainability as we think about how best to continue the important work we've done in our projects. Sustainability, as we know, is a very daunting term for nonprofits. Year to year, we must juggle short-term grants and contracts while remaining dedicated to serving our community. Strategic planning for our programs and organization involves getting creative and also taking a very hard look at fundraising goals and leadership. This webinar will provide the collaborative tools and resources to effectively plan for and sustain your programs. So today I'll discuss what we at Swords Plowshares see as the 5 critical steps for effective fundraising as part of your program sustainability plan. And then Amy Fairweather, Director for the Institute for Veteran Policy at Swords, will cover the next section, organizational leadership. After our presentation, we'll make time for questions and discussion. During the presentation portion, you may type a question at any time. Simply type your questions in the questions box on the right sidebar of this webinar's display. At the end of the presentation, we will review the questions and comments posted, and we'll also unmute you if you have audio capability, so you'll be able to ask us questions directly if you're able. All participants will be given a chance to ask a question of us by either typing it in the questions box, or if you have audio capabilities, by simply speaking up. And as a follow-up, if you have any follow-up questions, you can feel free to email us directly as well. Please note that this webinar is being recorded and it will be archived on the Swords Plowshares YouTube channel, and we'll post a link at the end of our presentation. So let's begin. Program sustainability for nonprofits, it can seem like it begins and ends with funders, which is why we're devoting the first portion of this presentation to fundraising. As nonprofits continually plan for sustainability, they must seek funding that aligns with their program goals. So step 1 is really about creating a relationship with your funders. Funding is not only about a good program and a good proposal, it's about creating that relationship. Initiating, developing, and cultivating relationships with grant makers at an individual level are critical steps. So figure out who your program officer is and get to know them. Conduct meetings with them, with current and potential grant makers, about your organization, the success of your program with data to back it up, and how you are uniquely addressing veteran unemployment. And then convey the findings of your work in a translatable way that the funder can identify with. That's a crucial piece, especially for those of us in the veteran world that sort of speak our own language. Long-term commitments are not easily given by private foundations, but they're often gauged when a strong relationship with your program officer is made. So establish your organization as a brand for your donors. And I know we say that a lot with establishing relationships with employers, and this holds true with donors as well. Convince them that funding you will make a difference, and determine what sets you apart and makes you unique, and then sell that. Also talk about linkages to other providers, such as those in the collaborative even, to ensure that you're providing wraparound care. Call to check in with your program officer of something exciting, whether it's an event, a breakthrough with a veteran, a new and exciting training program, or really anything going on, any sort of event. Invite funders to visit your programs for a site tour, and then make sure that key members of your staff are available to talk about your program. Prep them prior to the meeting to go over talking points. Also, a good point is to look for corporate volunteer opportunities with some of the employers you're working with, and also with corporate funders. Often they'll have a funding match program where they'll donate funds to the organization at which their staff is volunteering according to how many volunteer hours they have. So continuing creating relationships, do not miss established reporting deadlines. This is something that we emphasize time and time again. Make sure that you write down important reporting dates. Notify the funder that you're working on the report before the approaching deadline, especially if you need an extension. Don't notify them on the day that the report is due or after it's due. Talk to them about it before the deadline. Establish meetings before and after your reports are due to discuss your findings and answer any questions they may have so they can better understand the workings of your program. And then step 2, define your goals. This is an important one. So you need to really establish measurable, definable goals before you solicit funding. Make sure that these goals are well within your program's reach and don't overinflate. And make sure that these are goals your program has the ability to measure or currently is measuring and tracking. And that's also a crucial piece, which we'll get into a little bit further. If you will not meet these goals, contact your program officer prior to submitting your report and discuss and really be honest about why the goals were not met. It could be the difference between additional funding to address the problem and never being funded again. And we'll talk a little bit more about talking about challenges with your funder as well. Also, don't try to make your program fit into a funder's focus if it's beyond your mission and current program goals. And if you're unsure, contact the funder prior to submitting the proposal and explain your program. And that really gets you on their radar for future funding opportunities too. So step 3, measure your impact. And this is the meat of it all, right? This step really should be a standalone, and we can have a whole webinar on this topic. But when we think about measuring impact, it is undeniably tied to fundraising. So that's why it's a crucial step in this fundraising process. Metrics for measuring progress, outcomes, and impact, they're gaining traction in the philanthropic community, and funders are now asking for the evidence that their investments are making a difference. So create a proven track record and convey the success of your program to the funder, and that's a clear step in the process of establishing an ongoing relationship. We hear the term data-driven with more and more frequency lately, and that really means valuing the process of learning from your data and applying those principles of learning to your programs. Nonprofit organizations have often struggled to employ big picture data methods, which really describe the whole picture of your services, even while the landscape of data has changed and more organizations are driving their process as a result of their learnings. Nonprofits should implement data-driven strategies, but also, as they are on the ground and in the community in which we serve, we must also rely on the value of our experience and figure out how to incorporate the two to collect meaningful information. So that's a common challenge among nonprofits. So big picture data. Data for nonprofits, it should be mission driven. It should describe the big picture of your organizational values. And the data tools that you use should be used so that they can easily reflect this and be adaptable to meet the changing requirements of data gathering. And that's a very important piece. Organizations need to specify program objectives in measurable terms. You need to identify key indicators of success and develop a timeline to monitor the success on an ongoing basis. So that's where the internal process learning comes. Metrics should be incorporated into strategic plans and performance management processes, so with goal setting, with evaluations, etc. The process for collecting data should examine how best to concisely gather and analyze information without overly collecting data, or asking the same thing in multiple ways, which really often happens when you're juggling multiple contracts, which many of us are. So too many nonprofit organizations providing employment services, they often assess program and performance through program quantity as monitored by implementers. So for example, number served and number provided jobs, rather than program quality, which is really derived from client data. So in addition to those implementers that I mentioned, data should be client-centered, right? It should be about the relationship between the program quality and the outcomes. So for example, if you have outcome data that reveals that single women veteran mothers participating in a job training program do no better at gaining and retaining employment than those who are not in the job training program, on the surface, if the only data you have is whether or not they participate in the job training, this would seem to suggest that the program is failing to achieve its goal, right? But however, the process data that you may or may not gather might reveal that participants did not receive all of the intended services. There may be dueling priorities of motherhood that are competing with this person's ability to attend trainings, or there may be some other job readiness skill that wasn't achieved. So additional measures would need to be addressed before the evaluation that you're doing could really conclude whether or not the program was successful or not. So that's something to consider. And this brings up another pivotal question that those in employment services really need to ask, and that is job placement alone a valid measure of program success? So what if individuals do not maintain jobs for a reasonable period of time, or the jobs are not full-time jobs but are temporary or are apprenticeships and are really focused on skills building but not really on placement? So does placement alone indicate success, or is the achievement of some broader job readiness skill or vocational skills building a better indicator? So when we ask for placement numbers, and when our master funder asks for placement numbers, you can see how we are getting into the dangerous waters of asking grantees to do simple counting, which may not capture all of the truly desirable outcomes. So, and really an organization whose primary focus is on quality of job placement and employment retention can be limited by that too simplistic of quantitative outcomes. So of course, while placements are so important and that is our end goal, we also need to focus on the incremental steps as well. So really you need to look at, does it provide a complete picture of the outcome of the organization's activities? So if you're not showing the incremental steps it took to get there, so the skills that are gained, the job barriers that are resolved, then you really need to craft indicators which illustrate why some may be successful and retain employment while others may not. So this will allow you to clarify your goals and also determine performance metrics. We also focus a lot on data for our external audience to satisfy requirements, and that's totally understandable, especially for us that are overburdened by contracts and grants requirements. We need to see the value of data from an internal learning standpoint also. So data should drive internal learning as well. Measuring outcomes, it's a valuable tool for critical reflection of our programs, and it allows us to educate and inform staff of program productivity and key learnings of the program in order to adapt those programs to meet the changing needs of veterans. And then also when thinking about your external audience, it's not only funders, but board members, program staff, clients, community members, and staff from other organizations. They should be aware of your evaluation efforts. They should be included in evaluation activities if they're able to, and should be informed of evaluation findings. So communicating those findings effectively is an important step, right? So not all audience will need the same information, of course, but organizations should be prepared to present their findings in different formats for the different key stakeholders. So for instance, formal reports, community meetings, just internal staff meetings with board members, PowerPoint presentations, etc. So depending on the audience. So now we get to the meat of the proposal and the report, which is the narrative. And this is where you really get to tell your story. Funders don't know the intricacies of your day-to-day work. They don't know the effort involved, the dedication of your staff to your mission. This is where you get to sell your story. This is the only point, except for if you have informal meetings with your funders, that they really learn in detail about your programs, that they don't get just from looking at your data. And while funders value data, they also stress the importance of the narrative. So your reports and your proposals are really a reflection of your services. A well-written narrative represents the caliber of services that you provide and your respect for the work that you do. And this is really your time to shine. So questions that you can ask yourself: does your proposal and report tell your story? Does it hold meaning beyond the operationalized numbers you're required to report on? Because really quality reports and narratives should include both quantifiable information, your data, and also qualitative and informal information and success stories. And finally, can the funder get a sense of the dedication of the organization to its cause, of the impact of the organization on the veterans you serve? So defining your success story, step 4. When looking at employment planning, once you've established the big picture metrics, then you understand the importance of telling your story in the narrative. Figure out how best to define your success story. These are some important questions you can ask yourself in the employment planning process. These questions can be defined by data as well when we're looking at the big picture data, but for now I am simply asking you to reflect on your employment services. So how do you assess barriers to employment among veterans who are not job ready? This is critical for meeting the needs of veterans who are more of a challenge to serve because they may have various job barriers. Do you turn those away who are not job ready or who do not fit the guidelines of your contract? Does your assessment process address the need for wraparound care? And do you refer the veteran for additional services in order to remove those barriers? How is the assessment process documented by your case managers and staff? That's important because that's where a lot of the internal learning can really happen. So then, how do you measure wraparound care to address barriers to employment among veterans? Does employment preparation include a review of disability benefits and also the impact of employment on those benefits? Do employment and job training opportunities reflect informed veteran choice? Are you adapting to the changing employment needs of veterans, and are you flexible in the job training and placement programs you provide in order to accommodate the veterans' interests? Do training programs address the unique skill sets of veterans? This one is a given, right? Many of us pride ourselves on transferring those military skills to civilian training programs. So were the veterans' strengths, abilities, and interests considered when establishing job goals? And then finally, did the veteran lead the planning and job assessment process, formulating a job plan? So are you allowing the veteran to have ownership over their job goals? And are they taking an active role in the process? And then we get to employment placement. So in your placement process, do veterans serve to achieve truly meaningful job outcomes? And that's a tough question to ask. So how are you assessing retention? By simply whether or not the veteran is placed and keeps the job, or by whether the veteran is truly happy being a productive employee, happy at the workplace and the company, and has their occupational, social, and mental wellness increased? And that last one is a harder question to ask, especially in a definable or measurable term, but it's important for you to at least ask yourself. Was it a quick job placement, or did you take into account a career path for the veteran? Are you placing veterans in jobs because you know they're there and the veteran is desperate for work? Sometimes, many times, as we all see, that is needed, but are we thinking about the big picture here of truly placing the veteran on a career trajectory and something that is meaningful to them? And then finally, does the veteran have a livable wage in relation to the geographic region? So often funders, they want to know about wages and wage growth without really taking into account the geographic region. So California, for instance, has the Bay Area and the Central Valley, two very different employment climates, as we know. So for example, when you're simply looking at the average wages of veterans, even in the California Collaborative that we have, you're not taking into account that the Bay Area requires a higher livable wage than the Valley. And what is a very livable and sustainable wage in the Valley may not be in the Bay Area and is likely not to be. So really illustrate the wage growth according to your geography. And now for employment retention questions, this is where you can reflect on whether you've placed the veteran in meaningful employment and whether the occupational and social wellness has increased. So do you have a well-coordinated job retention support system in place? Can you determine if the veteran employee is integrated in the workplace and participating in the community? Does the employer provide opportunities to integrate and support the veteran? Do they have affinity groups? Are they culturally competent of veteran experiences? And finally, does the employer receive ongoing support services from your organization? So again, those questions, they're just tips for you to really reflect on in your services. We're not asking for this information from you, but these are just ways that you can effectively plan for and sustain your programs, and even define your big data methods. So step 5, try to ease reporting burdens, or also known as the elephant in the room. Am I right? We know it as a fellow nonprofit organization, and we even may have prescribed it in some of the reporting that we've asked of you. Reporting requirements placed on nonprofits can be particularly burdensome, especially for those of us with federal and foundation requirements. we find that we're collecting data on everything under the sun, and that even though we are collecting a colossal amount, the data can be piecemeal, and it doesn't provide a big picture for scaling and measuring the effectiveness of programs. And as I mentioned earlier, the process for collecting data should really examine how best to concisely gather and analyze information without overly collecting data or asking the same thing in multiple ways, which often happens when you're juggling multiple contracts. This makes it hard to keep your finger on the pulse of big picture data when you have a ton of funding reporting requirements. You don't want your case managers to be checking off boxes the entire time they're meeting with veterans, right? So if you collect information in a similar way to which your funder prescribes, but the methods are different, talk to your funder about this before you go and modify your data tools. Funders, they often know what information they want collected, and they want to see the overall picture of how you're serving veterans, but they don't want to burden the organization. They also really don't always understand the process by which you're gathering the information. So if your current data provides a complete story to the funder and essentially is asking the same questions but just in a different way, it's possible that that's acceptable to the funder. Although federal, of course, we know federal contracts are usually pretty prescriptive and they're less adaptable in terms of what metrics they require. So the data in your story should serve as a tool for lessons for the field and for funders. So often enough, the funders are not the people we serve, and this is something that I state time and time again. There's really no one-size-fits-all approach with veteran care, and the only way for funders to understand the changing needs of veterans is by learning from you, you who are on the ground, making that first touch with the veteran and defining what their needs are. That's how you can influence funding priorities, by being a teacher to your funder and not being afraid to state your challenges. Funders, they want to see that you're taking a hard look at the effectiveness of your programs, and they also want to know what challenges you see on the ground. And this is my favorite tip of all. Be honest with your funder about your challenges. More often than not, programs, they're adapting to meet the needs of funding requirements, to meet their numbers, and illustrate success when the challenges they're really experiencing would serve as a better learning tool for both the organization and the funder. So it's not all about success, it's also about learning. Every challenge we experience should be communicated to funders so that they can examine their priorities as they pertain to the needs on the ground among those we serve. And step 6, diversify your funding sources. So veteran employment services is becoming more common among funding priorities, and nonprofits should really access these sources while the attention to veteran unemployment has traction. Sustainable nonprofit organizations, whether large or small, they raise funds from a variety of institutional grant makers, such as private foundations, corporations, and government agencies. This is difficult when grant writers must juggle multiple contracts and grants, as we know. And grant writers and program staff need to really stay on top of timelines and grant deadlines. And also, if a veteran can co-enroll in grants and contracts, then of course the burden is lessened. It's imperative that organizations not have all their funds coming from one source. So funneling funds through diverse sources can help your organization remain stable amid declining revenues. A very dangerous trap for an organization to fall into is the expectation that current sources will remain consistent and that previously successful fundraising strategies will remain successful. So don't put all of your eggs in one basket. One of the best ways to sustain your organization is to expand your potential revenue sources through developing a vast number of resources. So in addition to having those diverse funding sources, you can also seek in-kind contributions. So when you're pursuing a donor, think about what else they might have to offer in addition to cash gifts. So for instance, marketing assistance or event-based can be things that you can suggest. And this is especially true with tech companies in the Bay Area. So they have large conference spaces that they very often are not using, and they're happy to contribute. And I'm sure it's true for other donors as well. Volunteers are also a good way for corporate donors to get involved, as I mentioned earlier. And some often provide a matching cash donation according to the hours the volunteer spends with the organization. So this is a great way for the corporation to see firsthand the great work that you do. Volunteers from the community are also a great way to offset costs, but really you have to be careful with how you run your volunteer program and how you define it to your donor. So while using volunteers, it's a great way to run programs, especially those that are funded by donors who don't fund salaries. The donors, your donors, may not see the value of having a full-time staff person who is well-versed in veteran culture, who has institutional knowledge, and specialized skill sets to provide services to veterans. So that is really what you need to illustrate to your funder. Also discuss with your funder how staff salaries are crucial to the deliverables of the grant and therefore should be counted, for instance, in the vocational training dollars. So the bottom line, keep abreast of funding streams and funding priorities and figure out how your program aligns with their priorities. The trend in corporate giving at the moment seems to be job training and vocational skills. So really looking at corporations, for example, Lockheed Martin, Accenture, Allstate, they're a good place to start. And then filter out groups based on target audiences. Also, local community foundations. For example, here in the Bay Area, we have the East Bay Community Foundation, and they focus on local hiring and job training initiatives. And it's very likely that your local community foundation may have a job training initiative as well. A few of the other big ones, JP Morgan Chase, they have military veteran initiatives and support workforce readiness, education, and housing. They specifically mention that they believe addressing the skills gap can be one of the most powerful tools for reducing unemployment and expanding economic opportunity. And in 2013, they launched what they call New Skills at Work. It's the largest private sector effort seeking to address the issue. It's a $250 million, 5-year initiative, so definitely look into that if you haven't already. Wells Fargo Foundation, they have a veterans initiative with a focus on community development, education, and human services. Kessler Foundation, they support innovative employment programs for disabled persons, so veterans definitely fall into that category. Some of the other hot potatoes in veteran employment giving are Prudential, Newman's Own, and of course, as we know, Walmart. So when you look into these programs and others, even if it's not a perfect fit, communicate and sell your program and get on their radar. Ensuring long-term support for veteran employment requires an investment of time, and as we've seen just in this presentation thus far, it requires a significant investment of time, right? And we all know that in the work that we do. Close relationships with your grant program officers, they can help maintain interest in veteran workforce development. And developing deeper long-term relationships with funders and employers will pay off. And so that's it for me. Without further ado, we're going into the next section of the webinar with Amy Fairweather, Director of the Institute for Veteran Policy at Swords and Plowshares. So thank you for joining me during this portion, and I'll be available at the end of the presentation for questions. Let me just switch over to Amy.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. And now my screen is doing, it's switched into a different mode of looking at it. So let's see. I'm just going to have to go through because I can't get back in. Okay, so now we're going to talk about organizational leadership, but sort of through a frame around fundraising and particularly fundraising for employment services. I know that some of your organizations have multiple programs, as does Swords, but we'll sort of be concentrating on the employment programs. So qualities of effective leadership shouldn't be too surprising. Visionary, strategic, inclusive, decisive, inspirational, motivational, and accountable. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about these different elements in more specific context as we go forward. So, decisive, but also adaptable. And this is going to go back to some of the data collection and the learning opportunities that Megan talked about. But first of all, let's look at mission statement. That leadership is clearly defined and can communicate the mission statement and the mission of the organization to all the stakeholders. I went back this morning and I read our mission statement, which I don't do every day, but it was worth doing. And our mission statement at Swords is, when their service ends, ours begins. War causes wounds and suffering that last beyond the battlefield. Swords to Plowshare's mission is to heal the wounds, to restore dignity, hope, and self-sufficiency to all veterans in need, and to prevent and end homelessness and poverty among veterans. And in looking at that, nowhere does that say we provide legal services, we provide employment services, we provide housing, and yet it covers all of those services that we do provide. So I'd encourage you to go, look at your mission statement, see what it says, see if it's really up to date, whether you want to add something. One of the things that we added recently was the idea of preventing and ending homelessness. Our statement used to just say end homelessness, and we put prevention in there as well. So I encourage you to look at that and maybe have a discussion with your staff and your leadership about your mission statement and what it says and what it communicates to the community, what it communicates to funders. The adaptability. Promoting a culture that's adaptable and open to change from within. So when I'm talking about this, I'm talking about listening to line staff, and perhaps folding that into the buy-in for data collection. So sometimes it's really difficult to get line staff to take the time or see the importance of all of this data collection and documentation when they have a real live human being in front of them and they're extremely busy. And they'd rather be having that face-to-face interaction. That's why they got into direct services. But when you discuss it and when changes can come from that, that can really demonstrate that you're listening to the staff, that leadership is listening to staff, and acting on those lessons that are being learned. So it's an investment. Leadership has to invest in data collection, and they have to truly listen to that data so that it's clear throughout the organization that we are not static. We are not a bureaucracy. Lots of us complain about bureaucracies. There's a couple of them that we deal with on a regular basis. A couple of the biggest bureaucracies in the country, that would be the DoD and the VA. And that we as community-based organizations can be more agile and can be less rigid than those organizations. Board leadership. This is important. And what is not on this slide is what the boards should not do. And what boards should not do is they should not be involved overly into day-to-day business of the organization. That's not their function. They're there to advise. They're there to take responsibility of the overarching mission of the organization, of its financial health. They are there to raise money. They are there to increase the organization's goodwill among the community and to influence funders or entities or powerful people to the ends of your organization and in keeping with your mission statement. So again, read the mission statement with your board periodically. Make sure that they know it. Maybe not verbatim, but that they can point to it, they know where it is, and they understand it. Making sure your board renews their commitment to the organization every year. We all know that there are more and less active members of the board, but getting them to proactively say and recommit every year is very important, that they can look and see that they have the time, that they have the will and the desire to move forward, because they're busy people. And so making sure that this is a priority. Also, 100% giving board is an important way of showing, and also a way for them to feel when they ask for support, particularly monetary support, that they can say, I gave. This is important to me, and this is why I gave, and this is why I'm asking you to as well. And it doesn't have to be a lot. You know, we've had board members who are former clients who are, you know, not wealthy by any stretch of the imagination. So a very modest gift from them still says, you know, I have limited means, I'm on a fixed income, and yet this is so important to me that I gave, you know, even if it's $5 or $20, it's important. Operationalize the objectives you think the board should meet. Again, this just goes to the board being really busy. So if you've identified tasks for them, which are sort of in the box to the right, of doing outreach or talking to potential funders, advocates, stakeholders, that you make it easy on them and take a little staff time to give them the materials they need, give them timelines, and give them goals and dates and all of the assistance they need. They need a conference call line, you know, those kinds of logistics to make it easy for them to do their job. I want to go back to, again, you know, the board doing outreach and the board's positions as far as their relative, you know, wealth or power in the community. One of our board members, who's just wonderful, Del Seymour, he's a former client. He started a business in the Tenderloin, where he does tours of the Tenderloin, the history of the Tenderloin, which of course is an area which has lots of homelessness and a lot of mental illness, substance abuse. And he started this business, and he is doing incredibly well, not only with doing the tours, but also in this community outreach. He's been doing the tours for all these new tech companies that have come in. And in doing so, he's created relationships with all of the community relations people at Dolby and Twitter and Facebook and on and on and on. So here's someone who seemingly, you know, who can't give a lot and you know, is not on the board of Wells Fargo, and yet has been phenomenally effective in introducing us to all of these people. So really recognize where the talents lie. Okay, program adaptability. So this again is where we can be agile, and where grants like this, the idea is that you may be relying on some of your core government funds, HVRP or VEAP, for the majority of your funding. But this kind of grant can give you the agility to experiment and to build some of these relationships and have that little extra time. So current employer need, you know, ask the employers in your community early and often about what their needs are now and what they anticipate them being in the future. The employer education, again, that is the at least what we use is the Combat Community, which we demonstrated for you all during our in-person meetings. Again, we can do that for you, you know, help you tailor it to your own specifications if you want to do it in person where you are. And then also I want to remind everyone that on July 15th we will be doing a live webinar in person event here in San Francisco. So Jeff will be delivering that curriculum to a room full of people, and we'll have a split screen on the webinar. So it'll be the slides that you all saw when we visited one another, and then also the camera showing Jeff actually presenting. So it's a very engaging format. And I encourage you to send that invitation to your employers, to HR people, to hiring managers, to recruiters, and they can watch that and have that opportunity. You should have all gotten the invitation for that to register, to send it out to other people to register, and if not, let us know and we'll make sure you get that. Long-term relationship building and the community employment partnerships are similar. In the long-term relationship building segment, when you look at the corporations and the employers in your community, there may be different things that you can get from them. So those folks who are going to hire your veterans, obviously that's the direct placement people, extremely important. But you also might find either from the get-go when you're doing your research or during discussions that they might not be doing that. But don't let that relationship go. That can be a relationship for funding or in-kind support, or as Megan said, the use of their materials or space or expertise. We had Google came in. There was a couple of young women who did some incredible work for us on the back end of our sites and our analytics, and for the life of me, I can't explain what they did, but according to our communications staff, it would have taken us months and months and months to even have identified the problems that they cited, much less fix them. You know, on the other hand, we're not placing a lot of vets at Google. It's extremely competitive, but you know, you can get benefit in other places. So, also the community employment partnerships, another area where I want to offer an opportunity to you. We've been talking to CVS Health. So these are the drugstores that are everywhere. They recently changed their name from CVS to CVS Health because they're putting these mini clinics in the stores, which apparently is a huge growing market throughout the United States. So we are talking to them. We are going to have one of our intimate hiring events that we discussed in one of our previous webinars and when we were all together, where we are screening and recruiting veterans for an event which is going to happen in August, during which the participants will be interviewed and where they're committed to hiring a certain number. These first jobs are more at the retail level, but we're really looking forward to building this relationship because they also offer a pharmacy tech on-the-job training program. That's very promising, both because it's an on-the-job training program, but also pharmacy tech is it's good wages, and it's an area that is not going to go away in terms of job need in the job market. So we're very excited about building this relationship. Now CVS is everywhere, so we asked the recruiter that we're working with, whose territory is all of the western seaboard plus Hawaii and I think maybe Guam. She would like to have a conference call with all of you where she can lay out these programs for you all and perhaps have similar programs in your community. So we'll be scheduling that opportunity for you to just, for her to be able to do it, you know, just once rather than individually, and there were quite a few opportunities there. So we'll be letting you know when we're going to schedule that soon. And then also in Texas, she has a colleague who has that territory. Oops, there we go. Oh, whoops, there's a typo on this. This slide was actually supposed to be meeting the emerging employment needs of the veterans, clients. This also goes to what is very appealing to funders, at least the funders that we've been working with Walmart. It was also much discussed during the recent release by the Bush Institute for Veterans Military Initiative. They recently put together very good materials. There's a number of guidebooks and tools that you can look at on their website. They have versions of them for community-based organizations serving veterans, for funders, and for veterans themselves. And then within each of these areas, there is a longer toolkit and a self-assessment tool. This was put together in partnership with the Institute for Veterans and Military Families out of Syracuse University, and it is really quite a good tool. But one of the things they really highlight there, and in this, when they published this and they distributed this and had a big event that was attended by hundreds of funders, as well as some movers and shakers and some service providers, was differentiating between veteran cohorts, young, old, women, men, different skill sets, enlisted, officer, and that also goes to what Megan was talking about stories. You know, when you really have these individualized high-touch services, then you can communicate that to your funders and tell the stories. Lastly, documenting the services from start to finish. Obviously, in these materials, there was a lot about data collection, including retention. But when you think about documenting them for the purpose of fine-tuning and tailoring your services so you can differentiate between veteran cohorts and individual veterans, and to provide that individualized service, and so that you can tell the story, a deeper story than just we placed 42 veterans and the retention rate was 82%, to really dig in deep. These are some of the resources that we've used putting this together and that I suggest you might want to look at. There's some really good materials here. The first one are the Serving the Post 9/11 Veterans Toolkit. Actually, you know, the title says Post 9/11, but the information in it is much broader. And what I really suggest that you do is not only look at it as the toolkit for providers, but look at the toolkit that they've made for funders, because that's where you can see, you know, what the funders are reading, and what they suggest the funders look at, and the funders tool for evaluating. There's a toolkit that's really just a form for evaluating potential grantee. So I suggest that you look at that. Department of Veterans Affairs Toolkit. Another product that is by Syracuse University, Engaging Veterans in the Civilian Workforce Toolkit, has a lot of really good materials in it, along with their policies, practices, and resources. And of course you can subscribe. Reminder to subscribe to our YouTube. When you go to our YouTube page, that's helping vets, there's a red button, you subscribe to it, and whenever we have anything, you'll be notified. Finally, before we open it up to questions, I want to very quickly point out in one of our grants some of the things that we've talked about. this is actually the grant, the master grant for this project. So this is the Walmart grant. And I have in front of me a marked up copy of it that our program officer, Kathy Cox, has her comments in. And there's a couple things. One, in our program summary, we talk about how initially we had not put in to our grant or had a line item for those in-person meetings that we had in Southern California and Texas. In working with everyone and in doing conference calls and webinars, we just really felt like we were missing that in-person touch, that the kind of communication that can happen when we're all in a room, and I think it really did when we got together. And so we talked to Kathy about it. She thought that was fantastic, that we, recognized a need and did something about it, and she's super excited about hearing about the Texas meeting. We actually are planning to talk to her later in the day. Another thing I want to point out, one of her notes here, we talk about reporting and data collection, and her comment is key, all capitals. Really important insights for us at the Foundation. Always know that we are open to communication that gives us a heads up on reporting challenges, and we can adjust reporting if needed. So, there's just case in point of what Megan was talking about. We don't owe, it's not necessarily that we'll get exactly what we want, but it's an open discussion, and it makes it easier for all sides. So that is an important point. Finally, the other thing I want to point out in her notes is we included stories from you, the stories that you sent in. And the notes on the side, wonderful story, this is great, just how powerful those stories are in telling relating the importance of their investment in our work. So with that, I'm going to stop and open it up for questions.
Okay, thanks, Amy. This is Megan here again. As I mentioned earlier, if you have any questions, you can simply type your questions in the questions box on the right sidebar of the webinar's display. And now is the time that we'll review the questions and comments posted. And we'll also unmute you so that you'll be able to ask us questions directly if you're able. So some of you that have a microphone or a headset, you might not be able to do this. But those of you that are connected on the phone, you'll be more likely to be able to speak up and ask a question. So either type it in the questions box, or if you have audio capabilities, simply speak up after we begin to unmute you. And it looks like most of you are now unmuted. I'm going to go through a couple of the questions that have come in thus far. One of them, is it possible to have a webinar on measuring your impact, data collection, and program evaluation? Yes, it is. It's definitely possible. I know that we covered it rather quickly and did it within, defining fundraising strategies. But as I mentioned, it really is a standalone. It's something that you should define separate from your fundraising efforts, and I think that it's something that we can really look at and have a whole webinar on. We can have a whole day on it probably. I would be happy with that, but you guys would probably be really bored. Yeah, we can definitely look into having a webinar on that. I know Amy laughed at me because I call myself a data geek. So the other question, can you talk a little bit more about intimate hiring events? So that would be for you, Amy.
Okay. So we talked about this before when we've done, what we found is that job fairs are not effective, and in fact, I think are depressing, and not, they just don't, people don't get jobs at job fairs. So what we've done is we put together these intimate hiring events where we work with one employer. We work with them up front, defining the jobs that they're going to hire for, that there's a guarantee that they're going to hire at least a handful of people, exactly what the qualities they're looking for in candidates, the conditions of the job, location of job, etc. and so forth. Then we go out and we recruit candidates. We work with the candidates if there are barriers they need to overcome in terms of equipment or a certification. And then at the event, there is a presentation, and then those candidates are interviewed and offers are made at the event. So they know going in that they're going to have a handful of people who are thoroughly screened, who have gotten materials that they might need in order to be the best candidates, and that they are going to hire people at that event. So we've done that with, we did it with Walmart, we're doing it with CVS, we've done it with East Bay Mud. And I think for them too, you know, we've had really good feedback from the employers because all of that groundwork is done for them. They have candidates that are qualified. They're not just sitting behind a table at a big job fair. It's sort of random. And, so they've just been really, really, really effective. And if you want to talk, you know, offline with one of our job developers or with Erica for some, you know, some more detail about really planning one, I'm happy to arrange that.
Okay, great. Thank you, Amy. The next and final question that we have, how should we get in touch with you for the CVS partnership that you spoke of?
Great. I was actually going to ask for a show of virtual hands about interest in that. So what I will check with Kathleen is her name, and I can't remember her last name right now, about available dates. And then Megan will be in touch to send a schedule for that. And then we'll also record it so that if people can't make that specific day, they can still hear it. So we'll, you know, in the next couple days, we'll get back to you on that.
Great. Thanks, Amy. And that concludes all the questions that we have from the questions pane. But as I mentioned, we unmuted you all. So if you have any questions, feel free to speak up. Okay. So if you have any follow-up questions after we conclude the webinar, then feel free to email us directly. You all have my email address. I can forward something to Amy as well if you don't have her email address. And as we mentioned, this webinar will be archived on our YouTube channel. Our handle is Vets Helping Vets. And I'll also send out the PowerPoint presentation to you all so that you'll have copies of the slides. So last chance, if anyone has, someone has a question. When will we know about refunding? Good question.
Yes.
Amy, do you want to handle that one?
$1 million question. Maybe the $64,000 question. Anybody remember that show? Okay, so we are actually meeting this afternoon with Walmart. You know, I can't make any promises that we'll know this afternoon, but we are, you know, in discussions, and it looks promising, and we will keep you, we'll let you know as we move forward when there will be another opportunity and if it's slightly different, what we're thinking in those terms. So, I'm sorry I can't say a date in the next, well, certainly before we reach the point where you've sent in your retention numbers at 3 and 6 months. We'll certainly know before that, before the end of that period. So as soon as we know, I'll let you know.
And then there's a great, and there's a follow-up question to that. And how are the criteria likely to change based on learning from this past year? Excellent question as well. You want to handle that as well, Amy, or shall I?
Well, again, I'm sounding like a lawyer, which I am, and the answer is I don't know. I think that she's expressed a real interest in the different cohorts within the group. So she's expressed, an interest in women, but I just really don't feel like I can venture to say exactly how it's going to change until we have those conversations. So I'm sorry it's not very helpful, but I just would be speculating. Megan? Hello?
I'm sorry, I was muted there. Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. So I think in terms of our adaptability and swords, when we define our RFP process and our program objectives, one thing that has been discussed with Walmart also is really also focusing on skills building. So really emphasizing job trainings, internships, apprenticeships, things of that nature, in addition to the placements, of course, but really looking at what skills we can really provide veterans in order to achieve that employment gap. So that's, we definitely emphasized it with this current program, but the next one there might also be that emphasis and perhaps even more so. But as Amy said, that's sort of speculation at this point. This is an 18-month grant cycle, even though we're nearing the end of our active performance period. We're not going to, if we do anticipate continuing the program, it wouldn't be until, of course, the end of the retention period that we would begin to start up a new funding cycle. So there is that sort of time lapse when you're looking at retention and not in your active performance period, if that sort of helps you create a timeline. So it looks like we don't have any more questions at this point, and we've muted you, so you can't speak up anymore, but I think that this concludes our webinar. And as I mentioned, we'll have this up on our YouTube channel shortly, and I will send out the PowerPoint slides to you all so that you'll have those to review as well. And thank you so much for joining us. And this is the last of our official webinar series, but of course we can look into doing something on data and program evaluation. So thank you so much for joining us, and we'll talk to you all soon.
Thank you.